Hello everyone. Today we're going to discover the secret sexual rituals of ancient Egypt that have amazed scientists. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and follow us for more intriguing content. Let's get started. In the dusty corridors of the Egyptology archives in Cairo, far from the dazzling light that bathes the statues at Karnak, lie papyrus fragments and ostraca that reveal a facet of Egyptian life that the Victorians were quick to censor. These documents, often catalogued under misleading headings or kept in private collections for decades, speak not of the public piety of the pharaohs, but of the secret sexual rituals that underpinned Egyptian cosmogony, and which, when finally deciphered and analyzed by modern scientists and linguists, have proven to be deeply surprising and shocking. The astonishment of researchers lies not in the existence of obvious sexuality in any culture, but in its explicit integration as a theological and magical force within the religious and political structure of ancient Egypt. Sexuality in Egypt was not simply an act of procreation or recreational pleasure, it was an act of cosmic recreation. The sexual force, the generative energy, was considered identical to the primal force that the god Atum used to create the universe. According to the Heliopolis cosmogony, the universe was not created by a word, but by a masturbatory act of Atum on the primordial mound. Atum, the self-created sun god, ejaculated, or sneezed depending on the interpretation, the seed of life that gave rise to the first divine couple, Shu, air, and Tefnut, humidity. This founding myth established ejaculation, and by extension seminal essence, as the sacred act par excellence, the matrix of all existence, a concept that radically inverts modern Western sexual views. Scientists were surprised to discover that this myth was not just a story, but a ritual template for the pharaoh in his role as high priest and incarnation of Atum. There was a secret ritual associated with the flooding of the Nile, Egypt's lifeblood, involving the pharaoh or his priests in a ceremony to simulate creation. Although direct details are rare due to the secretive nature of the practice, texts allude to an act of offering the seed into the waters of the Nile or into a sacred pool, intended to ensure the fertility of the country and the renewal of the cosmic cycle. This act, which to the modern mind is a dubious hygiene practice, was for them the sacrament of abundance, a direct communion with the power of Atum. Another fascinating discovery has been the evidence of sexual regeneration rituals associated with the cult of Osiris. Osiris, the god of death and resurrection, was dismembered by his brother Seth and then reassembled by his wife, Isis. The myth tells that Isis could not find Osiris's phallus, but used her magic to create an artificial one and miraculously conceive their son, Horus. This act of sexual resurrection was vital to the Egyptian belief in life after death and cyclical regeneration. Archaeologists have found reliefs and writings in burial chambers and temples that hint at the ritual reenactment of the union of Isis and Osiris. These rituals, likely performed by the pharaoh or a priest in the role of Osiris, and a priestess or the queen in the role of Isis, sought to transfer the god's regenerative power to the body of the ruler or the deceased. Sexual power was here the engine of immortality, a power that transcended death. Scientists understood that erotic forces were not a sin, but the driving force of the afterlife. The researchers' surprise grew when they studied texts on love and sexual magic. The Egyptians not only viewed sex as sacred in the temple context, but also actively used it in practical magic. Papyri have been deciphered containing explicit love spells, often written in vulgar language, that sought to invoke the sexual power of the gods to compel or attract a lover. A particularly striking example is the inclusion of bodily fluids and biological remains in these amulets and spells. The ritual use of semen, menstrual blood, or pubic hair from the subject of magic was prescribed as spell enhancers, as they contained the person's magical essence and life force. For modern scientists, this demonstrates a sophisticated, if not microbiological, understanding of biological identity and its use as a magical anchor for controlling another's will. The figure of the god Min is central to understanding the divine sexuality that astonished researchers. Min, The god of fertility and sexual potency was depicted with an erect and disproportionately large phallus. Far from being obscene, this symbolism was a celebration of generative power and a pillar of social stability. Rituals honoring Min, especially during the harvest, involved public processions and symbolic acts of vigorous sexuality intended to ensure a bountiful harvest. What's surprising to scientists is the ease with which Egyptian society, so hierarchical and formal, integrated the erect phallus as a religious symbol of the highest order. The Egyptian masters didn't have the cultural reservations of Europeans. For them, the phallus was the tool of creation, the building block of existence. This contrasts sharply with cultures that have relegated sexuality to obscurity or criminalized it. The study of wisdom texts revealed another aspect of secret sexual rituals, the teaching of sexual energy as a path to inner knowledge. Although Tantra is most famous for this, the Egyptians also possessed an alchemical path of energy. The containment and transmutation of seminal essence was not only for magical fertility, but also for longevity and mental clarity. Scientists have found references to the need for priests and pharaohs to maintain a large reserve of vitality in order to interact with the gods and maintain their power. Energy leakage through sexual excess was considered a loss of magical and political power. This knowledge suggests a highly advanced esoteric inner discipline, a precursor to the practices of internal alchemy that sought to transform carnal force into spiritual force. If you're enjoying discovering these secrets of ancient Egypt, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow us. There's still so much more to explore. One particular case study that perplexed scientists was the analysis of certain votive figurines found in private homes. These figurines, often made of terracotta, depicted explicit sexual acts or female figures with exaggerated sexual attributes. Initially, they were thought to be simple toys or fertility amulets. However, a more in-depth analysis suggests they had ritual use in healing or protective magic. The surprise lies in the idea that erotic energy could be invoked through an object to heal infertility or to protect a home from evil spirits. The graphic and explicit representation of the sexual act served as a magical battery or a vortex of generative energy that could be directed by intention. Sex was not only sacred, but also a utilitarian tool of everyday magic. Another ritual that puzzled researchers was the use of the imagery of coitus in funerary texts. Some papyri and sarcophagi contain scenes depicting the sexual union of the deceased with a divine figure or with his own wife. This was not a commemorative act of his earthly life, but rather a magical act of rebirth. Funerary coitus ensured the recreation of the body and successful passage to the afterlife. Sex was seen as the last act on earth, the catalyst for immortality. The revelation for modern scientists is the lack of moral judgment the Egyptians applied to this force. While later civilizations struggled to repress or hide sexuality, the Egyptians placed it at the center of their metaphysics, politics, and magic. The secret code that scientists have deciphered is that the carnal force is, inherently, the divine force. Ritual sexuality was also linked to the pharaoh's authority. The pharaoh's ability to ensure the country's fertility and cosmic harmony was directly linked to his sexual potency. Ceremonies like the Sed festival were not only rituals of political renewal, but often included symbolic or direct elements that reaffirmed his sexual vigor as proof of his connection to the gods and his ability to rule. Sex was, literally, the source of his divine legitimacy. Scientific research on Egyptian practices has had to overcome centuries of prejudice and censorship. Early Egyptologists often destroyed or avoided cataloging the most explicit texts, considering them crude or ancient pornography. The surprising discovery of the extent of sexual integration into their spiritual life was only possible when scientists finally adopted a non-judgmental, anthropological perspective, allowing the fragments of truth to come together. A crucial point that emerged from the analyses is the connection between pleasure and divinity. Contrary to the view of many later religions that associated carnal pleasure with sin, for the Egyptians, Sexual ecstasy was a glimpse of original unity, a reminder of the moment of creation by Atum. Physical pleasure was seen as a sacred experience, a form of temporary communion with primordial energy. Scientists confronted a culture where pleasure was not seen as a weakness, but as a tool of power. This understanding extended to the field of healing. References have been found to priest healers who used concentrated erotic energy, not only to treat infertility, but also to revitalize the sick and the elderly. The sexual life force was viewed as a highly potent current that could be directed by the healer's will to restore lost balance to the patient's body. Sex and medicine were branches of the same energy science. The final surprise for the academic world was the recognition that, despite the social rigidity and strict code of conduct at court, a double morality existed: a public and reproductive sexuality, and a ritual and secret sexuality reserved for the temple and the elite. The latter was the key to esoteric power and connection to the higher worlds, a distinction that explains why the texts were so jealously guarded and codified. Ritual sexuality was not for everyone, but only for initiates who understood its destructive and creative power. Ultimately, the secret sexual rituals of ancient Egypt that astonished scientists reveal that the Nile civilization was a society that understood and revered the life force in its most elemental form. Sex was the connection to the primordial chaos from which creation emerged, and the key to returning to immortality. The hidden path of sexual energy was, for them, the most direct route from the carnal to the divine. This is the final legacy that the papyri whisper to us from the silence of 4,000 years, an echo that resonates with the undeniable truth that life and its origin are, in essence, sacred. Thank you for joining us on this fascinating journey through the sexual rituals of ancient Egypt. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe, and follow us for more surprises in our upcoming videos. See you next time.